Welcome to the Circular Firing Squad. I'm Marty Gensius, a counseling faculty at Kent State University and host for the Circular Firing Squad. We've got 6 members, 6 questions, and 6 answers for each question. Questions are generated by each squad member, and they run from the serious to the silly. So let's go ahead and do introductions. Jen?
My name is Jen Cook, Assistant Professor, Marquette University.
My name is Gina Martin. I am a doctoral candidate at the University of Iowa, and I also adjunct for Northwestern University.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Martyr. I am a doctoral candidate at Kent State University, and I work at a private practice as a counselor.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Eric Perry. I am a clinical faculty member in the counseling program at Southern New Hampshire University.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elliot Ingersoll. I'm a professor and chairperson for 5 more days at Cleveland State University, and I'm also co-host of Apply Topically, which is also on the Pod Talk network.
Jen, it goes to you. You've got the first question of the week.
Woohoo! I'm glad to kick us off tonight. Please describe a time in which your generation gap showed while you were teaching. First up tonight is Gina, who I believe is actually the youngest member of our group. So this should be an interesting answer.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Jen. I was just going to say, I don't know if I have much of a generation gap, as I am still in my 20s, which, most of my students are, or I have older students than me. But something that did come up, and this is maybe speaking more to me as a person rather than me as an age-old person, but I did not know what Snapchat was. And I heard my students talking about it, and I didn't know what it was, so I had to look it up after. So that reveals a little bit about my old soul.
That's awesome.
So with that, we'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Okay, thank you. On one hand, I think it's an interesting question. On the other, it makes me feel old. One thing that came up was a student had said that they like classic rock, such as Nirvana. And that was like, okay, that's not classic rock. But I think they're playing it on the classic rock radio stations. So it has become more widespread. It's actually societal now. But that was when I realized the years are adding up. Eric, what about with you?
So my reference is a bit more nerdy. I mean, I tend to dig into kind of pop culture stuff, and made reference to He-Man and She-Ra, and just got crickets. I mean, 90% of the room had no idea what I was talking about. And only got lucky that a few people noticed there was a Netflix special for She-Ra on that they had just put out again. So it was interesting, just like those old cartoons and different things that we remember that don't work so well in metaphor when no one gets the reference, right? But yeah, so that's my example. Elliot, how about you?
Oh, my students tease me mercilessly, call me Dr. Analog, because I've got very cherished examples of video recordings of counseling sessions from like Carl Rogers to Marsha Linehan, and they're good sessions. The fashion doesn't carry well, but when we closed our counseling center and revamped it, I said, we're going to keep all the VCRs because I've got these things. And everyone's like, well, take them to the media people. And they're like, well, these are copywritten. We can't put them on disc. So I've got my VHS, and then they re-updated the classrooms, and there were no RCA jacks. And so I had to go on the internet, and I found this beautiful device that translates from the analog VCR to the digital podium of the classroom, and the students just thought that was absolutely hilarious. Not necessarily in a good way. How about you, Marty?
It's kind of interesting. I think we're going from youngest to oldest in this process so far. And then we go back to Jen. So my generation gap experience came when I was trying to explain the stylistic model of transcultural counseling, which is a 3 by 3 by 3 model. and there are 3 layers to it. So the bottom layer has 3 by 3 squares on it. And I was trying to describe that layer and saying, not all of the cells light up like the dance floor on Saturday Night Fever. And it was dead silence. And I was like, Saturday Night Fever, John Travolta. And I came home and told Aileen this story, and I have since stopped using that analogy. So back to you, Jen.
I've got a number of these analogies that I've quit using. The cartoons, Eric, right there. I can't bring up the Jetsons or the Flintstones. They have no idea who I'm talking about. Sometimes the Flintstones, they'll know who those folks are because of the vitamins, the kid vitamins. But I've also been told that Nirvana is classic rock, and suddenly thought, no, that is nostalgic rock as far as I'm concerned, grunge, if you will. My example of this gap for myself was during a very basic time in class when I do what they say that Cook always does, which is change the furniture arrangement in the room. And one of the groups had moved themselves kind of back into the corner of the room. And I had said, nobody puts baby in the corner. Dead silence, the entire room. And I told them, I said, tonight, your homework, it's on Netflix. You must go home and watch Dirty Dancing. Because if you haven't seen it, you just have to see it. It's not because it's a great movie. It's because you have to see it, because nobody puts baby in the corner.
Well, or just to see Patrick Swayze.
Yeah, I mean, you got to see them dancing on the log. I mean, that's all the guy has in life, If that's all you got to watch it, Bless his heart. All right, I think we are turning over to Gina for question number 2.
So I'm going to shift the mood a little bit here. How are you and your family navigating what's currently going on in your state with the pandemic and the impending changes as we near the new school year? We're going to start with Stephanie on this one.
So there's never been a time in my life where I've been more grateful to not have school-age children, because I'm not sure how to make decisions or what that would, there's just too many things to consider, and there's no good choice. There are better choices perhaps, but I'm really glad I don't have to think about it in a personal way. I have to think about it for my clients and what it might mean to them. It doesn't change much in our lives right now. Just we're not affected. We don't have any little ones in the school system at the moment. So luckily we're having a zero amount of shift. But let's get to someone who might have a little bit more juggling to do. Eric, what's going on with you?
Well, I'll admit to slowly losing my filter as we get closer to school start times. Luckily, we have the choice to keep the kids home, and that's something that we've elected to do and are able to do. In that my primary job duties are from home anyway. Most of my work is just going to shift to the evenings, and I'm going to teach a 7 and 9-year-old during the day, and my grad students later in the evening. I will say, though, that the challenging part is that it's become polarized in my area to some degree, that your decision becomes a political statement. It becomes something rather polarized. And I'll be honest, just out of fear for safety, I'm going to take every precaution that I'm able to. I don't see a political line here. I don't see where one exists. And I have trouble just digesting that part of it. I think what's been really helpful is that we've had a lot of conversations with the kids, had a lot of conversations between my wife and I and family dinners that, we make sure that we process this a good bit, right? They're missing their friends. They want to go back to school. They want to see everyone. And, there's been tears and there's been excitement and just a kind of whole mixed bag. So our strategy has been, we need to, for lack of a better way of saying, feel the feels, right? We need to take the time to process, to talk, to be together, and for it to be okay that this is upsetting and frustrating and scary and all those things. So I think our best strategy at this point is to really just make sure that we make time for these things, be really intentional about it. And I think that's helped us cope with it a great deal. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Elliot, how about you?
Well, very similar, Eric. Lots of long dinner conversations. My kids are both in secondary school. My son will be starting university next year, and he'll be 18 soon, and he can kind of make his choice, but he has an engineering academy he's part of. All the equipment's it's set up so it's socially distanced, but we have a lot of vulnerable people we interact with. So if one person goes back to school, everybody might be vulnerable, and we've had to weigh the health risks with the kids' personal desires, mental health needs, and it has been really difficult. My partner and I have not felt very good about any of the choices we've made, but we made them as a foursome, and that seemed to be the best that we could do. How about you, Marty?
Well, I've been kind of accused of being insensitive about this. I don't have any kids at home, or as I like to refer to them as super spreaders, to send anywhere to class. So Aileen and I, when we have this conversation, we both feel for parents who have to send their kids out. But I'm staying at home. I mean, I'm not teaching any courses on campus. I'm at an age and at a risk group where I don't want to increase that risk. And luckily enough, our university is saying you can make those choices as faculty. So I'm grateful for that. But I also, I see myself getting angrier that the school systems and politicians are not taking better care of and safety and in terms of COVID and spreading COVID. We live right next to two schools, the high school and the middle school here in Kent. And so we're very aware of what activity is going on in the schoolyards and on the fields and things like that. So I'm not, it's not going to affect my plan much at all. With the new school year, I'm lucky enough to be able to work from home. Jen?
So no kids over here, so not having to deal with that layer, and all the best to the parents who are having to make those choices. I feel for you very, very much. I am at a university who is not offering a choice, so I have a lot of anger. I have a lot of fear. I vacillate between tears, between dark humor, between screaming, and really trying to make sense of why our nation is making a public health crisis political. And I read an article this morning out of New Zealand. They were celebrating their 100th day in a row of being free of COVID in New Zealand. And they're not the only country who has taken some pretty strict measures. And I thought to myself, this selfishness and the idiocy. I have a lot of judgment right now and a lot of anger. I think because I've taken this very seriously. I've been nowhere. I've been to the grocery store. I'm an only child. My mother's been by herself down in Florida. I haven't been able to visit her. And I'm very angry when people are making choices not to wear masks, not to distance, and to send me back into the literal feeling of firing squad, not literal, but I didn't sign up for this. And mask or no mask, I do not feel comfortable going back to campus. So it has been a rough road, and I think we're going to see an even rougher road ahead. So yeah, bummer boat babies over here tonight with the back to school question for sure. Gina?
I love that you threw in alliteration, though. That made it better.
Well, and since the last episode got coined after my swimming in the bummer boat, I had to bring it back tonight.
Important, yes.
Love it. Yes, it's bummer boat all around. I agree with so many of you on so many different accounts. I, too, am very lucky in that my daughter is only 2, so we are not faced with that decision yet. But watching some neighbors go through that and watching dear friends of ours have to make that choice, it does not seem fair, and it's definitely a bummer boat. But that being said, also, I'm very lucky, too, in that I don't have to return to campus. University of Iowa is returning to campus, but since I'm in my final dissertation year, I have lucked out and I can do most of that from home. So it's been kind of a good thing for me, but also just hard to see everyone else that you care about go through some of these things. With that, we'll turn it to Stephanie with our next question.
Well, now this feels pretty inappropriate, but shifting it to something lighter, perhaps.
We had to have a palate cleanser after that.
Well, good. Yes, let me be that raspberry ice or watermelon mint popsicle. So my question is, what's the weirdest movie you have seen? And I wanted to add an addendum to this question that it's not your college roommates' art exploration kind of experimental pick. I'm thinking regular movies. But with that, Eric, what's the weirdest movie you have seen?
Oh, this is a difficult question, right? Because I think I've seen quite a few, or at least tried or attempted some. And honestly, the weirder movies tend to keep my attention a little bit better. And I'm drawn to this movie particularly because it's connected with a memory for me. It's Eraserhead. Has anybody ever seen that from the 70s? Right? So the Cliff Notes version of the story, because this is Firing Squad, is that it's the day before Christmas Eve. I'm staying at my grandmother's house, which is an old funeral home they happened to buy and refit as the family home. That still has the cellar that moved between the main house and the crematorium and I don't know what you would call the staging area. I'm not up on my mortuary science. But my aunt's bedroom was down there, and I come downstairs, and I'm maybe like 10, and this is the movie she's watching. It just started, and she's like, come sit down and watch with me. This is really cool. You're going to love it. I did not at the time, and it was horrifying and strange and weird, and every time I see it or think about it, I get that, like, I'm back in the basement of the mortuary family home. It's a weird story to go with it, right? Yeah, so Elliot, I think it's up for you.
Yeah, this was okay. My brain read the question, and the first thing my brain said was, "Oh God, time bandits, time bandits," and I was like, "Oh, hell yeah!" But then I was like, "Well, I walked out halfway through that movie, so that's really not fair." And I was in an altered state of consciousness, so that's not fair. So maybe it wasn't the movie that was weird. So I thought, okay. So I told my brain, could we do something a little more straightforward? And then we came up with Antichrist with Willem Dafoe. And I've seen it like 3 times. Context, I'm working on a popular article about why is there not more castration horror in the horror genre? And of course, Antichrist is filled with not actual castrations, but also metaphorical castrations. And lots of people are taking me off their Facebook right now, I can tell, as this is going out. But anyway, I would go with Antichrist with Willem Dafoe. Marty?
This is another tough question. Yeah, it seems like a fun question, but it's a tough question. And so I gave it a bit of thought. To me, that's a developmental question. So weird changes at different ages, and it changes throughout life. I also am not into gore or body-changing horror, so no Naked Lunch, no Eraserhead, although I've seen bits and pieces of it. However, developmentally, the weirdest film I saw when I was 11 was my dad took me to see the first run showing of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And that kind of set the curve for appreciating those kinds of films. My daughter reminds me that I showed her Rocky Horror Picture Show when she was 11. And I don't know how appropriate that was, but apparently we're passing on the tradition. And then I went to college and I did a minor in aesthetic English, which was another way of saying film, and saw Fellini's 8.5. And I thought that is the next kind of level of weird film. So, thinking about this, there's lots of films that I saw. I don't know if I would consider them weird. There are mind-bending films like Coherence, which came out in 2014, Memento, 2000, and then The Machinist, that came out with Christian Bale. All of those kind of take twists in your head. There are alternate world films like Donnie Darko, Clockwork Orange, and Brazil, which I thought was brilliant, speaking along the Time Bandits area. And then there's just bad movies. And I don't necessarily consider bad movies weird movies, but Manos Hands of Fate is probably the worst film ever made and was spoofed by MST3K. So that's my long list. You set me up with this question. I couldn't give you one. So Jen, you're up next.
I struggled with this too. I don't know why this is such a hard damn question, but I think I went for the movie that made me say over and over again, I want those 2 hours of my life back. And I think the reason for that is because we actually believed this movie. There was like this big debate when we all saw this movie. And as soon as I say what the title is, you're going to be like, at least some of us will. And that was Blair Witch Project. This had to have been the weirdest, dumbest, give me my 2.5 hours back movie that I sat in a theater for. And I thought to myself, and we were actually debating whether it was real. And if you go back and watch it now, folks, like, not scary, not weird, not anything, except why the hell were we watching this? But at the time, it like created all this debate and all this question of like, did this really happen? Of course it didn't happen. Are you kidding me? But that's the best I could do with that one. I tend to like the weird. I have to be honest, like anything that's a little off, I tend to like, which I think tells y'all something about who I am. So Gina, what you got?
So Marty actually mentioned one of mine, but hands down, the weirdest movie I have ever seen is Clockwork Orange. I just could not get past that. I was an English major in college, so we talked a lot about it, and it was talked up a lot in our program, and it was this big thing that everybody had to see at some point. And I was studying abroad in London at the time, and I sat down with a bunch of my fellow cohort members, and we were all excited for this movie. We got popcorn, we did the whole shebang, and it must have been wasted on me. I just did not understand it, and I thought it was a very strange film. So that is mine.
So when I was saying weird, I also wanted to say that for me, that also did not mean bad necessarily. I like those movies that catch you off guard. Again, I think they're engaging. I think by the time I was 18 or 19, I felt like I could predict with accuracy about 98% of the time where a particular movie was going. Marty also mentioned one that I was debating using for my answer, which was Memento. That one, I think that was a movie I remember coming out of the theater and being like, oh, finally, something that was different that, I'm going to be thinking about for a while. And there's been various ones along the way. I particularly set up this question to discuss the movie I had seen most recently that I would consider weird, which was Midsummer. And the year before, I had watched Ari Aster's the director, Hereditary, which also caught me off guard and was weird, but weird in that unique way. But Midsummer was something that was on my brain for weeks, and I want to talk about it with anybody whenever they would be open to that conversation, because I think there's just so much in there to dive into, but it's not predictable necessarily. It draws upon a lot of things, but it was also completely unique. So that it's not the normal progression of a summer blockbuster per se. With that, Eric, what's your question?
My question is, what is your biggest academic pet peeve? And the question really is just out of being in academia or being involved with academia, what are the things that are associated with this experience that just really get on your nerves? Elliot?
It's a long list, but I'm going to try to summarize it very concisely here. I think the hurry up and wait bureaucracy, the slow moving, the only thing that moves slower, I think, is the military. And when people don't speak up, we have got some of the most critical social issues of our society coming to a boil. And I'm looking at people who can't even agree on a preposition for emotion. And I'm like, it just drives me insane. And then when I say, could we cut to the chase, everyone looks at me like I just dropped a pound of heroin on the table, and it's very frustrating. So I guess straight talk and getting things done, the fact that that doesn't happen more often is very, very frustrating to me. How about you, Marty?
It's real simple for me. Badly run meetings and you have lots of meetings in academia and meetings that don't have any agenda. So I've been in meetings like that. There's no objective for the group. So why the hell are you pulling us all together to have this conversation? And there's no purpose for us to be together as a group. So this could have been an email. It could have been a document. It's something I could read in 5-10 minutes, make a decision on, and give you any feedback, if I have any feedback on it, to send back to you instead of pulling us all together. Second to that, and similar to that, is badly done professional development. I'm in the College of Education, as I think many of us are, and you get into a situation where you have somebody doing some professional development or giving a report, and you've got PowerPoints that they are reading to you. It's a horribly non-interactive way to train people. So those are my two. I know you only asked for one. There's a third one, but I'll save it. And on we go to Jen.
I'm going to second, third, and fourth everything that I just heard right now, because one of my favorite lines is that could have been an email. I do not like to have my time wasted. I don't know if anybody enjoys it, but I don't like that any more than I like backtracking. That really bugs me in life. So I'm going to go real petty here. I hate it when I see signature lines that say, Dr. Jojo McJojerson, PhD. It's redundant, y'all. You don't need doctor and PhD unless you are a physician with a PhD. And then I would hazard the guess that you should put a comma, put MD, and then put comma PhD. So I'm agreeing with what I'm hearing, and I could go real serious, but I'm going to go real petty.
I just checked my signature just because I panicked for a minute. My heart fluttered. I was like, do I do this?
As you should, Eric. I mean, check yourself before you wreck yourself, right?
I do appreciate that, Jen. I'm in the clear, though, just as a heads up.
I'm the grammar police. I just had to go petty on that one. Gina.
Love that. So I don't have the doctor yet, but when I do, I will be sure to look out for that. Mine, so I'm going to go piggyback off of Marty's prior answer here. I think mine is developmentally the dissertation process. So I'm at the forefront of that right now, and I'm finding that, and I know I'm in a nuanced age of writing a dissertation because we have COVID and everything else going on too, but the amount of time that anything takes to turn around with, and I guess that's kind of similar to what one of you were saying earlier too, just how slow moving some of this is. I feel like I'm so ready to hit the ground running, and there's 900 boxes that I have to check first. So that's kind of where I'm at with my biggest pet peeve at the moment. Stephanie, how about you?
Oh, well, a lot of them have been covered. And I think probably Gina, I guess I have to be putting more in before I can be frustrated about not getting anything back. So I'm thinking about it too from more going with students. That's how I was interpreting the question a little bit more, and kind of the day before an assignment is due, when they have been told and prepped for months, at least 4 weeks minimum, have been given a PowerPoint presentation on the assignment and on the rubric and how it will be graded, has been given a list of resources, and been open for questions, and even schedule time for questions throughout. That the 2 days before, when you have plans with family or you have something else important going on, when you are not available to reply to emails nonstop, that all the questions come in and the clarification requests for an assignment come in. So it's kind of a pet peeve to put all of that work to ensuring that they have all the tools necessary and enough time to even make mistakes and try again. And it doesn't change much from high school. So back to Eric. Eric, what is your academic pet peeve?
Well, mine comes from a recent experience. And I'm going to be careful not to overgeneralize here. and just say that this is an experience that I've had a few times. I had a colleague reach out and say, hey, I think you made a mistake. And I said, yes, I did. And the reaction that I got was strange, right? It was, you did? Uh-huh, I did. And it seems to be that there's this pushback that in order to be an academician and professorial and this higher level being an authority in academia, that you can't admit when you screw up, that it's almost faux pas to say that I made a mistake. And I thought it was interesting. So I went on to have the conversation, and a good conversation, just expressing how this isn't a conversation that's normally had. And there's this pressure, I guess, for us to portray ourselves in a particular way. And it doesn't jive with me as a person. I screw up on a regular basis. That's part of what being human is, I believe. And it's much, much easier for me to make that recognition and move forward with it than it is to defend it. And I find this with a lot of arguments, and I've had my mind changed quite a few times listening to really powerful people speak and seeing things and experiencing things. And sometimes I think it's really antithetical to the profession that we're in to hold that line. And I've seen it happen quite a few times, that we're just going to hold on to this idea because the idea of admitting that we were wrong or that we've changed is somehow looked at differently in academia than it is in other spaces. So that particular experience is what brought the question out for me, was that there seems to be just this ongoing conversation that I think needs to happen. And I think happens more authentically in our space than in others, right? So I was thankful for that particular experience. It just kind of drives me nuts, though, that it doesn't feel like it's okay, right? So I think our next question is Elliot.
Yeah, and I got another palate cleanser for you. Mine is, what are your favorite daydreams or daydream? And I just thought we should caveat this with PG-13 rating, so to speak. So Marty, favorite daydream?
It's always Istanbul. That's where I go to. I talked about the movie Brazil, where your mind just kinds of, where that character's mind wandered and created this whole world. And that's sort of where I go. I go to Istanbul, and it's either the food or the people or my friends there or the sights. And I am longing to always go back to Istanbul. Jen?
I'm great to float off anywhere. I think it depends on my mood and what type of year it is. I mean, mid-January, there's definitely a beach involved. I think we've had this conversation in the past about our fantasy of where we would go and where we would be. But I think right now, just sort of true confessions. I drove past the airport the other day and became tearful. I think that I am longing to be somewhere else. This is the longest I've been in Milwaukee the entire time I've lived here. And feeling that draw to be with my friends, with my family, with my connections, whether that is in Istanbul or whether that's in Mexico City or whether that is in French Lick, Indiana. I kind of don't care right now as long as it's not here, and recognizing that it can't be right now. Maybe only draws one in further, but I see myself floating. I'm above the clouds. I'm on an aircraft. I'm going somewhere that's going to expose me to something different, which is variable from time to time. Gina?
Yeah, mine is similar. I swam in college, and I went to Pepperdine, which is in Malibu. And so the pool was outdoor, and we had palm trees, and it looked over the beach. So it's a really tough location to beat. But when I daydream and when I wander off from the middle of Iowa, oftentimes I go there. That was kind of a peaceful place for me, and somewhere that, doing laps and laps and laps of swimming, while that's not always my way of self-care, so to speak, it is definitely a peaceful place and something.
And that's where your what 3 words were last week. Because I put them in to find out where your favorite place was, right in the middle of Pepperdine.
There it is. Yep. College was a special place. I love swimming there, and that's also where I met my partner. So yeah, it's a special place. What about you, Stephanie?
This revisits one of my answers to that question. I think when we were talking, we're all referencing talking about this before. One of those huts on the water in Bali, away from all other huts. I don't want to be on a string of huts. I want to have one big, luxurious hut on the water, where just my husband and I can be, and no one around us. And somehow magically we get all of the provisions we need to live comfortably and not have to worry about food or toiletries. And because it's in my fantasy, everything just works out. And also I already have my PhD in all of my fantasies, because it just makes it that much better. It's the only way I can enjoy it. Eric, what about you?
So I'm going to tie in a few previous questions. I don't know if I can take another episode of J House. It's this family on YouTube that my daughter's obsessed with right now. They're absolutely perfect people. Their kids don't even cry. I mean, these kids are just in it, and every piece of footage is just immaculate. They don't make messes. Like, there's nothing out of place. Like, all these things. We've been stuck in this house primarily with each other since March. And still I find myself, the things I daydream about are the stupid vacations. I want to go to Erie here, which is like Nowheresville, tiny little amusement park and beach with crappy water on Erie. I want to go to Cedar Point. I want to go to Virginia Beach. I want us to be able to do things together and continue to make those memories as we were, right? I have this, unreasonable want for things to be the way they are not. And I guess that's what the daydreaming is for, right? But those are the types of things I get excited about, are those vacations that, really they're not the wow Disney World type vacations. They're the good memories, come home exhausted kind of vacations. So that's my daydreams right now. What about you, Elliot?
Well, for me right now, about a year and a half ago, some very powerful fictional characters emerged in my brain-mind unit, and I started working on a novel, and I'm almost done with it. And my fantasy is that I could somehow sell it, retire a few years early, and head right back north of the border and go to, Saskatoon is one of the premier retirement communities in Saskatchewan, Canada. And that's looking pretty good to me right now. So that's what I fantasize about. I'll finish the book either way, whether it sells or not, but that's the daydream. So Marty, we're back to your question.
Well, my question tonight, we go back and forth between palate cleanser and serious stuff as we're adjusting and getting used to this show. But my question, because it's something I've struggled with for years, and I'm curious, what's your personal strategy for keeping your work in order? And that goes to Jen.
Yeah, so I'm on the alliteration train tonight, apparently. So I would say Post-its, lists, and phone. I had another P in there. It totally went out of my head. For me, piles, that's the other thing. I'm looking at two of them right now. I am a pile person. I like things to be piled in front of me. I don't want it put away. If I put something away, it's done, which means it's not going to happen. So I like the piles. I like the Post-its. I like my phone. I'm not fully paper, y'all. Like, I came up in that time where they said, you got to switch to the iPhone calendar and all that kind of stuff with the alerts, while my students who are 22 are walking in with a paper planner for the past 7 years. And I'm thinking to myself, what happened here? Like, I switched, they didn't. But I'm a dual person. So I've got Post-its galore. They're all over the place. They're stuck to my forehead, along with my calendar with alerts that are always blowing up at me being like, yeah, that book chapter was due 2 weeks ago. Go ahead and do that, that type of thing. So over to Gina.
This is such a good question. I go through this all the time. Just how can I better structure my planning for getting stuff done? And recently, my partner and I discovered an app And I talked about not knowing what Snapchat was before. And I'm also not fully transitioned to the Google Calendar or anything like that. I still use a very clunky paper calendar. But my partner and I got transitioned onto this app, and it's called Notion. And it's basically like a checklist kind of app where you type in what you have to get done, and you can have different categories and stuff like that. So I have one for that day. So things that maybe were due 2 weeks ago that have to get done imminently. That's one section. And then I also have like a later or a Monday, Tuesday, and so on and so forth. And I also like to color code things. So some of them are color coded by class that I teach, and others are, for the dissertation, that's got a different color and stuff like that. So Notion has been a big part of why I'm staying on track with a lot of things.
Don't you miss crossing stuff off the list physically? Like that is part of it for me, is that tactile, like using the pen as hard as possible on the Post-it or on the list.
Yes, I actually have a Sharpie too. So I double up. I do both. And because I like to cross it off and feel that catharsis, I use the Sharpie to make sure I really, whatever, the past is in the past, right? Another frozen line. So, Stephanie, how about you?
As it turns out, I also use dual methods. I love my phone. It took me a while. Originally, I feel like I was one of the last 10% of people to get a smartphone. And it took a little while, but I've had my current iPhone for a long time now. And I love using the reminders. I try to put in as many alerts. I wish I could make more alerts in it besides like the 2. And then additionally, I make a list in the morning, a to-do list, and what I have to do. And if I don't get to something on the list that day, it just rolls over to the next day, and it helps me prioritize. So I have all of my appointments and also like due dates and big things that have to get done in my phone that will give me clues, but then I can break it down and also break things into smaller tasks on my daily to-do list. And that it works all right. Eric, what are your strategies?
So I like the list method, and I use primarily digital at this point. I've ditched the written calendar to-do list kind of thing. For me, it's got to be more of a mental strategy that I've had to adopt, and I think that's being really aware of where I am emotionally, physically. The to-do list has more of an impact on me than I have on it most days. So I need to be really cognizant of the types of things that I should be doing. I'm also a task jumper. There's times where I get really worn out on something really quickly, and I need to move to something else, but also I need to move back and forth, right? I need that shift and change and difference really in activity to be productive. So my least effective way at getting at a to-do list is to have only one thing on it. I need a couple of things to sort through to keep my mind engaged in a way that I know that I can be successful. So I try to be really cognizant of those tasks and grouping things together in that way, and really just being aware of, my physical, how I feel, where I am, especially with things being the way they are right now. I think it's really important to have that sense of self-awareness to move through those lists. So what about you, Elliot?
It's funny, as when I read Marty's question, what's your personal strategy for keeping your work in order? And my first response was resign from the department chairperson job. That's going to put everything back in order. With all the things that are happening in our society, I realized that the upper administration was moving in a direction that did not address my passion or what I thought was important. And I finished a term and I was like thinking of another, but then I was like, no, I don't want to do this. So I did 6 years the first time, 4 years this time, and feeling very good about being done with it. But on a more day-to-day basis, at university, I have a 6-foot by 4-foot chalkboard where I write everything and I get to cross it off with big red chalk. And then here, I write it on the windows of my 3rd floor office with markers that write on glass, and then I cross it off. But with my brain, I have to have it really big and right in front of me, or else I will forget about it. And that seems to work for me. How about you, Marty?
Well, I've been struggling with this for a long time. And Eric and I've had these discussions before, and I will purchase every productivity app that comes up that I'm aware of. I'm currently heading into a position where I'm going to be focused on a grant. And the person who ran the grant before me ran it by keeping everything in an email search. And I can't do that. I mean, I can't physically do that. So like Gina, I've been looking at Notion. I'm not sure it's going to do all that I want to do, but for my workflow, to keep my work in order, I've settled on 2 apps. Fantastical is a calendar app, and I'm Mac-based, so I'm sorry, Windows folks. But Fantastical as a calendar app, and Todoist as a to-do app. The beauty of that is that they're both linked. You can link them. And so when I get an email and somebody says, will you do this? It needs to, and I figure out when it needs to be done by, I can put it in Todoist and it will show up on my Fantastical on the date that I want it done or it needs to be done. If I don't finish it, what happens is on that day, it gets pushed to the next day. So it repopulates on the next day's calendar. So I'm constantly checking my calendar to make sure what I need to do, and it's always there. Whether I put it in on the calendar, it shows up on my to-do list, or whether I put it on Todoist and it shows up on my calendar. So those are the 2 things I do. When I really feel like I need to be super productive and focused, I'll use the Pomodoro technique, which is 40 minutes on, 10 minutes off from working and focusing on particular topics. So that's everybody had tips on that I think were all wonderful tips for folks to consider, different ways in which we keep our work in order. And that's our final question for tonight, but we got one final shot. And this is a question, and it will go to Jen first and work its way down through the group. Cake or pie, and what kind?
Well, for me now, neither, because I haven't eaten sugar in 5 years, but it used to be pie, chocolate peanut butter pie, to be specific. Gina.
Wow, I so envy you. No sugar for 5 years. That's incredible. For me, it's cake, and I do cake at least once a week. And I love the chocolatey, dense 3-tier cake. Stephanie, you're up.
I love birthday cake with that frosting, and it has to be like the good kind, and the shark fin pie from Mitchell's Fish Restaurant. So sorry, I'm straddling the line. All right, Eric.
Oh, it's pie, no doubt. My grandmother being a Southern belle, that's what we ate, right? Most nostalgia for me right now, though. I depart from tradition in that key lime is it for me. It gives me those good daydream kind of feelings, but it has to be a made fresh kind of key lime pie, not like the Sara Lee frozen box version, right? No cheap imitations when it comes to pie. What about you, Elliot?
Same thing. It's got to be from scratch, but spice cake with vanilla icing. And again, yeah, it's got to be the real icing, the good icing. The icing that doesn't just slide around in your mouth like you just ate radioactive toothpaste. How about you, Marty?
Well, everything sounded great except the not sugar thing. I mean, there have got to be some not sugar pies out there and not sugar cakes that you can have, Jen. I was seriously headed in one direction. Then Eric said key lime pie, and I'm like, oh, yeah. But really, it's apple pie a la mode, usually vanilla. But I've discovered the joys of caramel ice cream on hot, warm apple pie. And yes, one more Jardiance for my blood sugar. So those kind of go in combination. That's it for tonight. I want to thank the squad, Eric, Jen, Elliot, Stephanie, and Gina. Look for some of these characters on their podcasts on the Pod Talk Net. You can also find out more about our group by looking at circularfiringsquad.net. That's the website for this show. And you also can pick up episodes there. Besides, all of your major podcast servers have it. Our theme music is from Menage a Quad, Real Swing Shet. That's it for this episode of Circular Firing Squad. Ready, aim, fire.